I don't know about you, but I find expectation to be such a turn off. And so I think I'm afraid of letting down a group of people or letting myself down or writing because people expect me to write rather than it coming from the heart.
I mean, I think everybody is complicated. Like we might want to think of ourselves as simple and as upfront and good people, but we all have things lurking beneath the surface. And I guess something that really interests me is if you did something at some point in your life a different way, or if the situation was just slightly different, that things turn out in a completely different way, how would that look?
Welcome to Shelf Therapy, the podcast where literature meets inspiration. We are passionate about bringing the magic of books to the young readers, especially in Indonesia. In each episode, we dive into conversations about books and how it can profoundly impact your lives, and in hopes can help you navigate yours. We would really appreciate your support by subscribing to this channel. Don't forget to leave your thoughts in the comments below, and please leave us your feedback so that we can grow together. This season, we are shooting at the comfort of Bumi Kinar's library in Ubud, so I'd like to extend my heartfelt gratitude for them for lending us their beautiful space. I hope that you enjoy the podcast. Today, I'm with Hanako Footman and Laura Elizabeth Woollett. Hanako Footman is a British-Japanese actress and novelist based in London. She trained at LAMDA and has since starred in prominent TV, film, and theater projects, including the Emmy Award-winning The Crown and the West End world premiere of Madhouse, where she performed alongside David Harbour and Bill Pullman. Laura Elizabeth Woollett is the Australian author of a short story collection, The Love of a Bad Man, and 3 novels, Beautiful Revolutionary in 2018, The Newcomer in 2021, and West Girls in 2023. Hi, girls.
Hi.
Welcome to Shelf Therapy. Welcome to Ubud. I'm so happy to have you both here. Before we start talking about books, I just want to get to know you a little bit better. Is it your first time here in Ubud or Bali?
It is, yeah.
It's my second time, actually.
It's
I was here in 2016 too. Not for the festival though. Just
For holiday.
Just for holiday.
I mean, we're really close. So
Yeah.
yeah. How do you find Ubud so far?
I'm still in a sort of jet lag days, but it is extraordinary. I sort of can't believe my eyes when I wake up in the morning. It is so beautiful.
Yeah, it feels like a dream. This is actually my first time overseas since 2019. And I've missed Indonesia because I've been a few times. So it feels almost like familiar to be here again. Even though I've only been in Ubud once, but Indonesia, the climate and everything, it's really nice to be back in the heat.
Where else in Indonesia did you visit?
I actually did a residency in 2017 at Salihara in Jakarta, which went for 9 weeks. So yeah, was in Jakarta for quite a while and traveled a bit in Borneo as well, and also Jogja and
I see.
Yeah, Bandung as well. Yeah.
And is that where you write? Just you're allowed to write and write?
Yeah, I had 9 weeks just to write and to view other art, and
that's amazing. I need to do some of these residencies.
Tell us a little bit more about the residency program you did here in Indonesia.
I don't think it's going anymore, sadly, because it was such a great program, but it was called Asia Link, and it connected Australian artists of all practices, basically, not just writers, with places in Asia, residency places that they could go to. And my residency, it was very unstructured. So I was just staying at Komunitas Salihara, and there would be artists from all over the world and also from Indonesia just coming in and doing dramatic performances or dance or writers. And I would get to, you know, come and watch them, but it was always, I never quite knew what was going on. Yeah, and I got to write and just experience the city as well. Yeah.
How do you think that sort of changed you as a writer, or did you already debut your novel before these residency programs?
So I had published my short story collection, but none of my novels so far. And so I felt very much like an emerging writer. And I think it was a really humbling experience because I had the experience of being a young writer in Australia and getting a bit of attention, but having to navigate an international setting and I was only 27 at the time, so I felt very like out of my depth in some ways. And I think, yeah, being in a different environment for so long as well, it kind of challenges you. And I think when you travel, sometimes you think, oh, I can make myself at home quickly and make the most of this place. But I think there is a bit of adjustment and sort of navigating that anxiety. And yeah, but overall it was a positive experience and I have great memories of that. And I think it was really formative for me as a person and an artist.
Yeah, that's so interesting to know because I know in your novel there's some kind of Indonesian influence a little bit, and we'll get to talk about that a little bit more later. But now I want to also ask you guys about your sort of relationship with literature or your early memories with books and reading. How did you start writing? Like, what made you want to become, or what made you want to write your own novel?
As a child, I loved to write and also draw. And I was constantly, if I liked a story, I would rewrite it with my own cartoons and put my own little...
draw the cartoons?
Yeah, I would draw little cartoons and put my own little twists in the story if I wanted to change how it went. So I think I was writing from a very early age, and I won my first short story competition when I was 7 for a story I wrote about my pet fish, tropical fish.
Was that something you were told to join? How did you find out about a competition at 7 years old?
I think it was just my local council was having a little competition for children, and my mum kind of said, oh, maybe you're interested in this, and I was just like, yeah, absolutely.
Because I was talking yesterday with Bora Chung. She wrote Curse Bunny, and she joined her first writing competition just for the prize money. That's how she started writing. She wanted money. That's it.
Yeah. I got $20, which was nice.
That's a lot when you're
cute.
7.
Yeah.
That's a lot, actually.
Yeah.
Were you always like a reader as well?
I was, but I think I went through a phase in my teens where I didn't want to be seen as a nerd.
A bookworm.
A bookworm. And so I only read magazines for a couple of years. I would read sometimes young adult novels.
I was obsessed with Dolly magazine
in
Australia.
Yeah.
What's Dolly magazine?
It's a young girls magazine from Australia, and whenever I used to visit Melbourne, because my mom's from Melbourne, I would be so excited to see Dolly magazine.
Yeah.
Was
at
it
the supermarket.
a young teen magazine?
Yeah, I don't know what's the equivalent in the UK.
We had a magazine called Ms. magazine, and it had some. Looking back at it now, it had some very questionable things.
Yeah.
Really questionable.
I know, even like children's book sometimes. We have some questionable things in there. Yeah, we also have Gadis magazine here in Indonesia. Yeah, how about you, Hanako? What was your childhood like in regards to literature?
I wasn't a voracious reader, and I'm still not a voracious reader. There were certain books that I adored growing up. There's a series by William Corlett, and the first one is The Steps Up the Chimney, and it's about a group of siblings, 2 sisters and a brother who moved to the countryside. It's a bit like The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe.
I love that.
And they go and live with their uncle, and there's this chimney, a huge chimney, and they suddenly see these steps up the chimney, and they walk up these steps and they discover this whole new wing of the house. And in this wing, a magician lives there. And then they get up to all these like adventures. And I reread that book recently, and it really holds up, and it's so magical. And so that's sort of one of my earlier memories of reading, where I really connected to the characters and I felt bereft when I finished it. In terms of my route to writing, I never wanted to be a writer. I never thought I could write a book. I never really had any interest in a career in writing. It really came out of a place of necessity because I'm an actor and the roles that were being provided were for predominantly white actors. And at the beginning of my career, when I was 18, it was all period dramas in the UK. That was all that was being cast. And this was before Bridgerton and things like that, where there was sort of blind casting. And I was essentially told by multiple people within the industry that I wasn't white enough to play those parts, and was in fact dropped by my first agent because he said I was too difficult to cast because of my ethnicity, among other dreadful things. Yeah.
It's quite surprising to know now.
Yeah, it feels like a world away from the casting that we know now. But yeah, it was pretty tricky at the beginning.
But I feel like I can relate to that. Yeah. Nobody really knows where I'm from.
Yeah.
Like not Asian enough, not white enough, etc.
Exactly. And when the Asian roles finally started trickling in, I was told that I wasn't Asian enough. Because I have this sort of ethnic ambiguity, and no one knows that I'm Japanese, and everyone's, thinks that I'm exotic looking, but they don't really know where to place me. And that's a complete nightmare in acting because they love stereotypes. They love putting you in a box. They love sort of the token this or that. And I'm sort of a soupy mess of everything and nothing. I don't believe that. I know who I am. But that's how I'm perceived. And so I wrote a TV pilot for myself to play a role that reflected my lived experience as a British Japanese woman and a mixed race woman. And as I was writing the pitch deck, which was sort of the lookbook that you send out to these phantom producers to try and get it made, I was writing the character descriptions and they turned into prose. And then those prose turned into a book eventually, 3 years later.
That's amazing.
Full manuscript, yeah.
Did you learn anything from the process of actually releasing your first novel? Was there anything sort of unexpected that you came across or learned with this experience of becoming a writer?
I think on a personal level, I feel more like myself than I ever have because I've been able to marry myself and my creative self entirely. And that's not something that I've been given the opportunity to do as an actor, as a creative. And I was able to give myself that opportunity. And I think perhaps as women, we often wait for someone to give us the green light, to give us permission to go and do a thing. And there are 3 fairy tales in this novel, and I'm very interested in the idea of fairy tales and those first stories that we are read when we're children. And actually it goes back to your point, I didn't even think about this, but as a child, those stories that we're consuming about Prince Charming coming along and saving you, and that was kind of my relationship to the acting industry. I thought, I had such self-belief, but I was waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for someone to come along and finally give me a green light and say, this is the role, this is the thing that's going to release you and let you be your creative self. And eventually I realized that no one was coming.
That's so interesting. So really writing your own book really gives you a voice, and it's your own sort of personal voice from inside that you really want to voice out, and then eventually help hopefully other girls, women, actresses, etc. in the future. How about you, Laura? Could you take us back to maybe the first time you wrote your first novel or released it? How did you feel, and what was the experience like in the process?
I guess I had a strange experience because I had my short story collection came out first in 2016, and I guess I count that as my first book, and I had a good time with it, and I didn't really have that many expectations, I think. And I was just like, oh, it's just short stories, I don't know how much attention it's going to get, and everything that came to me was just a positive, unexpected thing. But then my novel came out 2 years later, and I think it took me a lot longer to write, and took a lot of work, really. It was 3 years of my life, and I did a lot of research. And when that came out, I think I just thought it would make a bigger splash because I had this experience with my short stories, and I had sort of it in my head, this is what publishing a book looks like. And I think in the scheme of things, it actually did do well, but I sort of built it up in my mind because I think once you've had publication, you can never go back in a way. You can never go back to that state where you're just writing just for yourself. And
how so?
I think
Is it the sort of business element?
Yeah, the marketing, and I guess the sense of looking at other people and what they're doing and what other people are getting versus what you're getting. They've sort of a competitiveness enters your
That's so
head.
interesting. I'm literally just finding this out since yesterday when I started the podcast and speaking to a couple of writers about it.
Yeah, and I think I'm coming out of the other side of that because I've matured a bit. But I think when I was a bit younger, I got a lot more like caught up in those emotions and stuff. Now I can kind of say the work is the work, and that's actually when I'm happiest, is when I'm writing something and really deep into the book and deep into the characters. I think when the publication comes and you're doing the events and stuff, I enjoy that less. And I think a lot of writers do. A lot of us are quite introverted people.
Right.
And I think now I'm better at sort of separating those two things.
I think that's the dilemma with the creative industry too these days. Like, you want to have the time and the space to be as creative as you can be, but then again, we all now have to think about the business side and marketing, etc. So where do we find the balance? And I'm really happy to know that, you know, countries like Australia, they really have a big budget for cultural diplomacy, promoting their national creatives, talent, so that they can, you know, also keep creating without really thinking about money or having a job, etc.
Well, that sort of stuff is very competitive, and I have been lucky to
that's also competitive.
Yeah, it's also very competitive. Like, I've been lucky to be on the receiving end of a few things like that, and I think those things have really shaped my career and helped me, but not everyone is so lucky, especially when they're starting out, and so many people, hundreds of people will go for something and they can only give it to 3 people, for instance. So yeah, it is very competitive, and there could always be a bit more money, but yeah, I think
for sure.
Yeah, those opportunities are so helpful for writers.
I want to just quickly touch on something that you just said, because you've written 4 books, and this is my first one. And when you're writing your first book, it's just you, and no one else has been invited in.
Yeah.
And so you can just write whatever you want, whenever you want, and it's a very personal endeavor. As soon as you release that first book, you have invited hundreds, thousands of people into your process, which is a relief. I found it a huge relief because these women were pretty heavy to carry around for 3-4 years. And I'm very glad that people are reading this book, but you're inviting noise and voices into something that has been thus far very insular and private. And I find that I've been shocked to find it kind of gets in the way of my creativity, because I'm all of a sudden considering other people.
Are you talking about like the audience and the critiques that are giving you feedback of the book?
Less so critiques and reviews and all of that. More, in a way, when people love your book and respond to it in such a visceral way, it's kind of terrifying, because and then they're going, I can't wait to read your next one. What's your next one? Tell me about book 2. And I don't know about you, but I find expectation to be such a turn off. And so I am afraid. I think I'm afraid of letting down a group of people, or letting myself down, or writing because people expect me to write rather than it coming from the heart.
Yeah. I think fear really hinders creativity.
Yeah.
Because for me, when something is really original and creative, it just comes from sincerity.
Yeah.
It comes from you, from deep inside. And there's nowhere else to get it. So yeah.
As someone who's written more than one book, did you find the antidote to that fear?
I guess for me, like, I've never been like the people-pleasing person anyway. I tend to just write what I want and think about how people will perceive it later. I think with criticism and stuff, I write a bit of criticism myself, so I think I enjoy when people engage critically with my work, even if they're not liking everything about it. I think having that clash of readings and opinions can be a good thing sometimes. I do think misreadings get on my nerves a bit, and when people read my books in a shallow way and project things onto them that aren't necessarily in the book, that annoys me, but also I can separate from it a little bit, because in the end, like, you have your intentions and what you intend might not get through, and maybe that means you need to do it a different way next time, or maybe it just means the reader is not the right reader. But I think there's always the sense for me that I'm developing and it's never my last book, you know? So there are things in my like previous books which I'm like, I wouldn't write it like that. I would do something different, and I would take that line out. I would take a red pen to the page and remove so many things, but it seemed like the right thing at the time, you know? And I think the viewing yourself is always a work in progress. That's how I see myself. And I think I don't get too caught up. Even it can be emotional when the book is new and when you're, for instance, like, people always say my characters are unlikable, and they, even when they're reading the books in a positive way and enjoying them, they talk about the unlikability of the characters and, oh, these women are so horrible, for instance. And that's not what I do. That's not how I set out to write a character. You know, I don't think, oh, I'm going to write the most horrible, unlikable person just to kind of be edgy or whatever. I actually see these characters as real people, so that does get on my nerves. But I think it's happened enough times that I'm kind of like, it sort of washes off me a little bit.
Right.
Yeah.
I would like to know more of your process with writing your novels. Do you see sort of a red thread or a continuation from one novel to another, or do you just like completely randomly start a new novel based on your idea at the time? Or do you have a bigger picture, or do you just write whatever you want to write?
I think there always is a bigger picture. My first 3 books were all inspired by history or true crime events, and took inspiration from real life in a very in a way that wasn't my own life. You know, I was looking at true crime books and headlines and stuff, and I think I reached the end of that and was like, I want to do something different with West Girls. And I actually delved into my own life a bit more for the first time. And I think previously, when I've written other characters, there's been like expressions of aspects of myself in a character, but more extreme. You know, I'll be like, this could be me if I had these character traits and responded differently to the situation. And West Girls is a bit like that, but I think I was looking at my upbringing a bit more and my own life for inspiration, because I felt like, I guess I got to a point where I was a bit uncomfortable about writing about real people, even when I was fictionalizing real events. And I just felt like I had reached the end point creatively with that. So I think West Girls is quite different from my other books, but it actually began, it's like connected short stories. It's not a conventional novel. And a lot of it, the short stories, the earliest ones, I actually wrote in Jakarta in 2017 and just saw them as standalone short stories. And then I, years later, saw these connections between things that I was writing about and decided to follow this character at different stages of her life.
That's really interesting that you're sort of basing West Girls more on your personal self. And you cover sort of the topics of, you know, the pressure that society brings in for women in terms of beauty and competition against each other. Was it really something that you just wanted to vent out onto the world? Or I guess you have a message for women or society? I
never write from a point of this is my message, you know.
Okay.
I just have the characters and see where they go. So my main character in this book is Luna Lewis, and she has a very similar background to me. She grows up in a blended family. Her mother's Maltese, her father's Anglo.
My grandma's Maltese. Sorry.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, and her stepmother is Indonesian, and she has half siblings who are mixed race. And so she grows up in a family which is a bit unconventional. She's very close with her mother, but also has quite a conflict relationship and sort of pulls away from her at times, whereas she really admires her stepmother, who was actually in Putri Indonesia. Finalist. She didn't actually win it, but she really admires her stepmother. And
that's incredible. Sorry, because not many people would be able to reference that. And for you to reference Putri Indonesia shows your experience living in Jakarta, I suppose.
Yeah, and also growing up with Indonesian family, extended family. Yeah, and she admires her stepmother's beauty, and really, she is an intelligent girl, but she sees beauty as the world that she wants to be in, and fashion. She really wants to be in that world, and I think people assume sometimes that if you're interested in being beautiful or fashion, that you must be a superficial person. But I think there is a sense of there are parallels with the writing world. I think like there's an aspect of imagination in a world that's going on, which is not sort of mundane life. You know, people get into fashion because it's sort of a world of images and larger than life in a way. And Luna, to bring it back to myself, she is not a beautiful child, but she grows up to be tall and thin, and she decides she wants to be a model as a teenager. And I actually had that phase as well in my teens, but I didn't make it very far, and I didn't want it as much as she did. But eventually Luna, people, because she looks a bit ethnically ambiguous with her Maltese background, people assume she's Eurasian, and she lets them assume, and she ends up, with the assistance of her agency, rebranding herself as a Eurasian model. She calls herself Luna Lu instead of Lewis. And so it's sort of a story where I took my own early life but took it in a different direction.
You seem like you enjoy writing or creating really complex characters. Was that on purpose or just flows naturally?
I think it comes naturally. I mean, I think everybody is complicated. Like we might want to think of ourselves as simple and as upfront and good people, but we all have things lurking beneath the surface. And I guess something that really interests me is if you did something at some point in your life a different way, or if the situation was just slightly different, that things could turn out in a completely different way. How would that look? I think that's the starting point for a lot of good fiction.
How about you, Hanako? I'm sure you had a lot of experience with pressure from society about beauty and also competition. Was that something that you also included in your novel?
Yeah, definitely. Much like Laura, I don't write with a set of topics that I want to touch upon, but they sort of rise to the surface when I'm writing these characters. Mongrels about 3 Japanese women and their interweaving lives set across the UK and Japan, and one of them is called May, and she's half Japanese, and she's the one that's most similar to myself. I mean, they're all parts of myself, but May, I think, is the most recognizably me. And yeah, she has this relationship with, she's a friendship with Fran, who is blonde and blue-eyed and comes from a nuclear, very white, perfect, happy, seemingly happy family. And she sort of falls under the spell of her best friend Fran and loves her because she is everything that May believes herself to not be. And I certainly had that growing up. You know, I would look to I grew up in a very white, affluent area called Wimbledon in London. It's just London. Some people think it's not London, but it is.
Wimbledon tennis?
Yes.
Oh my God, I'm a big tennis fan.
Oh, are you? I have
my dream
been
to
once.
go there one day.
Come visit. It's very, very, very beautiful. I once went in my mother's tummy, and I went once more, and really was just there for the strawberries and cream because tennis is above me.
Okay.
But what was I saying? Yeah, so I grew up in a very white affluent area. No,
Area.
not an affluent family. White affluent area.
Yeah.
And yeah, I had the fortune of going to private school. My grandparents paid for it, but everyone was probably, I think, arguably a lot more wealthy than I was, and certainly no one was Asian, or everyone was essentially white. I mean, there were a few Koreans who'd moved over in the later years of high school, but they were very much a separate thing. It was almost like they were at a different school because they all stuck together. And in order to survive in school and high school, it was very much like you had to cut those parts of yourself off that was anything other than, white and middle class. And I was, doing that from a very young age. And from, those small microaggressions where you open up your lunchbox and you get out your egg fried rice and everyone's going, what's that? It's disgusting. And it's
Really?
better than your tuna sandwich.
Yeah,
Trust
it's the
me.
best.
It's the best.
I wish I could have onigiri for lunch every day.
Oishine.
Yeah. Oishi.
Yeah. So yes, to answer your question, lots of sort of bending and having to try and be something that, as all children and teenagers experience, but something quite particular about being mixed race in a community that isn't that at all. But now I'm extremely grateful for it, and I think it's amazing.
I'm also curious to know about maybe books or writers that you sort of look up to for inspiration. Did you have to, go through a couple of books to see how you want your novel to sound almost?
I think when I came across Lisa Tadeo's Three Women, I was so struck by the humor and the honesty of her prose, and particularly about women and their experience in the world as a woman, and the way that they're portrayed and perceived, and the things that they actually really feel underneath that, and the rage and the desire and the sort of like disgustingness of a woman. And that really spoke to me. And as I said before, I had no intention of ever writing a novel, but she kind of opened the door and showed me the way. And if I was ever to dare to write something, that would be what I would be going for. She would be my North Star. I've not really found a voice since Lisa who's spoken to me on such a cellular level. So for me, it's Lisa. And Mongrel was directly inspired by Three Women because this novel follows three different women and kind of gave me the template for what I would, the structure of those like changing voices and narratives. Yeah, and then I sent her an early copy and she read it and she loved it and she quoted for the book, and it's on the front cover here. And
Would you like to read it?
This is just a shortened version. The quote that she gave was much longer and sort of completely bowled me over, and I literally fell on the floor in the middle of Soho when I opened the email. But she said, "Mongrel is so beautiful that I became lost in it. Simply, it must be read." Lisa Tadeo. Yeah, wild.
I can't wait to read all of your books and recommendations soon. But I was also wondering, has writing, ever since you released your first novel, did your relationship with reading or books change? Do you see it in a different light now?
Yeah, I think my tolerance for reading has gone down a little bit. I mean, it was always pretty low.
But it's gone even more down.
Yeah, I don't know. I suppose I need to be held by a book. I can't. I'm very impatient, and I need to kind of be taken by it. Otherwise, immediately.
I find that too. Sometimes I think it's just because of the world we're living in now.
Yeah,
where we're saturated with information. We need something like a quick hook to really get us into something that's worth our time almost.
Yeah, and it doesn't even need to be like a narrative hook. It doesn't need to be something that's, you know, a murder, or it's the prose, and I know what I like when I read it, and if I don't like it, I just won't continue, which I think is a shame, because I know that some books, you know, they take a while to get into, like A Little Life, for example, by Hanya Yanagihara. I started reading it and I was like, oh, I just can't get into it. And my friend Cleo was like, you've just got to stick with it. And thank God I did, because it's now one of my favorite books.
Wow. I started reading that book too. And I think you really need to have the right setting to read it.
Yeah.
I actually read it in India when I was on holiday. And I just went there and I was like, oh, I'm going to get time to work on my own writing when I'm there. But that book was so heavy and so immersive that I couldn't stop reading it. And I just devoted the whole holiday to reading it, basically.
Right. Did you guys bring a book to read in Bali?
Yes. I've bought a few.
What are you reading?
What are you reading?
I'm reading Look at Me by Jennifer Egan and Borachang Kersbani. Yeah, which I've had a copy of for a while, but I've never...
She's great. I hope you get to meet her.
Yeah, I was hoping I could meet her too and get her to sign it. So.
She's so into horror.
Yeah.
It makes me want to start reading horror now.
I also brought The Family Lexicon by Natalia Ginsberg, which I'm doing for book club when I get back in Melbourne. So
right.
Yeah.
How about you?
The Topeka School by Ben Lerner.
Okay.
Yeah. Have you read it?
Look it up.
No. Yeah, it's great. I'm really enjoying it so far. Yeah.
So how about you, Laura? In terms of finding inspiration from books and writers, do you have anyone in particular?
There's quite a few, but I think for West Girls, a book that I loved a lot was, and I read it years ago for the first time, was Veronica by Mary Gateskill. And I love everything I've read by her. And she's written quite a few books, which I'm making my way through. But Veronica is actually about a model as well. So I think reading that, I, realized you could set a book in the fashion industry and also it could be really gritty at the same time. And I think something I love about Gateskill is that she's really unsentimental and quite sharp and almost cruel in her humor sometimes, but her books always make me feel a lot, and I don't know how. And I think reading her over and over again, I'm just like, I'm not sure how she did that. And I look at certain paragraphs that she writes and I'm just like, how do I do that? But yeah, Veronica was a special book, and I had it on my table when I was writing West Girls for basically a whole year. I was just kind of picking it up and flipping the pages and looking at certain passages. And yeah, so that was a book that influenced this one. Also, a book that's been important to me is Blonde by Joyce Carol Oates. It was actually made into a movie a year ago or a couple of years ago, which I haven't watched, but the book is amazing and I think everyone should read it. And
is that the Charlize Theron film?
No,
it's about the life of Marilyn Monroe.
Oh, right.
Yeah, but it follows her from
with Anna de Armas.
Yeah. I haven't seen, can't bring myself to watch it. But yeah, it follows Marilyn from basically when she's a toddler until when she dies. So it's the whole life of this woman. It's a huge life, and you see her through her own eyes. You see her own like internal monologue imagined, but you also see all the men who are looking at her and the things that they project onto her. The like subtle violence of that, I guess. And I think the way people look at each other is really interesting to me, and how a person, the same person, can look so different from different eyes.
Is it written in third person or first person?
It's written in third person, but very close third person sometimes.
Yeah. And it flips between the different characters?
Yeah.
How many characters does it?
Countless, I think. Like she even has appearances from really minor people sometimes who just see her for one scene. You'll get her through a different eye sometimes. So,
and is it all does it just sort of flow into each other, or is it different chapters?
It just flows into each other basically.
Wow, that sounds great. I'm going to read that.
Yeah, it's a huge book. I think it's about 600 or 700 pages, so it takes a bit of time, but that's a book that I look at every now and again because I think it is just so amazing with perspective. And I think the ability to write a character and feel like you're inside their head without actually saying I is...
There's so many ways to write, so many ways to even play with the chronological order of time, etc. So
Yeah.
Do you also like to read and watch the movies that are based on books? And what do you think about them?
Sometimes, like, I think with Blonde, the discourse around the film was really annoying, so I didn't want to engage with it because I loved the book so much.
Annoying in what way?
I just saw people online being like, Joyce Carol Oates is horrible for trying to imagine Marilyn Monroe as a real person, trying to talk like she's in her head. Like it was, people were taking it really far and reading it as, the author shouldn't have written this book when they just didn't like what the movie had done with it. I think the movie was very I can't actually judge it because I haven't seen it, but people really turned against the movie but also turned against the book without having read it. So I was just like, okay, I'll keep my love for the book and not engage with that other aspect.
I see. How about you, Hanako? Do you tend to watch or read movies based on books? And
Yeah, absolutely. My favorites have been Big Little Lies and Sharp Objects. Have you seen them?
No.
Have you seen them?
I've seen Big Little Lies. I love Gone Girl.
Yeah.
I think the film adaptation is actually on
the
the
film
level.
adaptation is amazing.
Yeah, it's like on the level of the book, if not better.
If you like Gone Girl, then you should absolutely watch Sharp Objects because it's the same author. What's her name?
Gillian Flynn. Yeah.
Gillian Flynn. But it's a series, so you have even more.
Yeah.
And I think it's about 8 episodes, and it's directed by the same director as Big Little Lies, Jean-Marc Vallée, and he is incredible. He directs every single episode. He's sadly no longer with us, but
okay. I'm gonna check them out. Yeah, so I think I have one more question for both of you. Maybe something about your next project. I know there's no pressure about what's next, but I just want to know what you're working on. Maybe if you're planning to write another book or a residency.
Yeah, I'm actually working on my first nonfiction book. I can't say too much about it. My publisher is like, don't talk too much about it before it happens. But it's been a lot of research. It's sort of combining memoir, medical research, which has been a very new thing to me, to read all these psychology papers and stuff and talk to doctors and interviews, cultural analysis. So it's bringing together a lot of different things, and it's been a real change, I guess, to be working on that. And I actually had my first child a year ago, so trying to write while also mothering is a whole new challenge, let alone trying to write a different genre of book. But I am enjoying it, and I've got a residency coming up in Paris next year at the Keesing Studio, which goes for 6 months. So I'm going to be based in Europe next year, which I'm really excited about.
So many new changes too with your life, and I'm sure that will just add more to your writing.
Yeah, definitely.
And you, Hanako?
I am directing my first film. It's a short film, and I've written it and will be in it as well. It's a black and white short film, a musical, shot on 35mm. And we just need to complete the funding essentially so that we can make this thing. But hoping to film early next year. It's about 2 Japanese women and they meet at this party and they kind of change each other's lives just a little bit, but in a meaningful way. And it's quite a small, intimate story. And I guess it's about the things that we lose along the way, as we grow older, and then reclaiming those things and remembering our strength and our power and our magic. Yeah. And how meeting another person can remind us of that. And that's called Emiko Jones. And
I love that. I love the fact that it's kind of a part of life to lose things. Yeah. I mean, I lose things all the time. I get in trouble for it. But too. we lose all kinds of things. We lose people in our lives. We lose friendships, etc. So.
And we lose parts of ourselves.
And it's okay. To let that go.
Sometimes it's nice to recollect them though, and remember and celebrate those things.
Yeah.
And I do think that as we grow older, you know, there's so much magic in being a child, and our imaginations run wild, and we have all this creative freedom. And then as we get older, those things like get chipped away. And I'm interested in the kind of the reconciliation between that child, that inner child, and the adult. So that's sort of what the film's about.
I'm also curious.
Yeah.
Is it more challenging to write or produce a film for you?
No, I mean, I wrote a short film directly after I finished writing Mongrel, because it was the complete opposite of writing a book. This took me 3 years to do, whereas a short film, I think it took me about 2 weeks to write, and it was so nice.
That's such a contrast.
Yeah. And also, when you're working on film, it's a total collaboration. You know, I'm working with my producing team, I'm working with my DOP, I'm working with my composer, and it's a collective effort. Whereas when you write a book, as you know, you're just in a room by yourself. And it's very, very lonely, and it's wonderful, but it's lonely. Whereas, you know, filmmaking is a collective effort. So that's why I wanted to do that. But then I've also, I'm writing a feature film, and it's funny because the same thing that's happening with Mongrel is happening to this project, where I want to go deeper and I want to get to know these characters even more. So I can see it turning into maybe a second book.
Yay!
Which is nice. Yeah.
Would you also maybe turn Mongrel into a film?
Yes. Yeah. I'm working with a really wonderful producer at the moment, and it's out to a load of production companies in the UK at the moment. We're trying to see if we can develop it with some creative partners. So yeah, I'm hopeful that it will come full circle and turn into a TV series.
That sounds so exciting. So many incredible things, but I would just want to say thank you so much for being here today with me.
Thank you.
For our Shelf Therapy Book Club podcast, and it's been so wonderful to talk to you both today.
Likewise.